All right.
Awesome, everyone. And thank you for joining us. We are very, very excited to host this webinar for Black History Month. The Global Black Studies program at Western Carolina is new and is still establishing itself. So to engage in the discussion of the field, the importance of the field, why we do what we do, particularly in Black History Month, is very, very important because Black studies itself as a discipline was achieved through a historical process that is a benchmark in American history, but certainly African-American history. Student social movements, community and campus engagement, right? And, starting at San Francisco State College, right? And to give students an understanding of why Black studies is a very important discipline, a useful discipline, and open them up to an understanding of ways that the Black studies, the global Black studies minor, can augment and supplement their major to make them a better practitioner in their career and overall more informed, thus better citizen of the United States of America and of the globe. And in doing that, I wanted to bring people that had a connection to either the university itself or the region in regards to experience, research, and either studying or teaching or both. So I selected two gentlemen based upon that and their contributions and growing contributions to the studying, teaching, and researching the Black people. So we have Dr. I call him Khalfani. So Dr.
Yeah.
Khalfani Herman, who once was a student here, an undergraduate student here at Western Carolina. He is now an assistant professor of sociology at SUNY Buffalo State College. Him and I went to grad school together in different departments, but the way Black studies is set up, our interactions involved the research and teaching and studying of Black peoples. And we had a lot of mutual classmates and friends, and thus we became friends, right? He was in the sociology department, but I'll let him tell you us more about that. And I was in the history and the department in Black Studies program proper, right? And then secondly, we have Mr. Adam McNeil. He is a doctoral candidate. That has to sound exciting.
Man, look, let me tell you, man. Let me tell you.
At Rutgers University.
Liberation, dog.
In the history department. And he was part of a fellowship that studied Black Appalachian culture. Some people call it Afro-Lation culture, and he'll talk more about that. But, the brother is probably far more polished and ahead of the game than the average doctoral candidate, or at least he is than I was, right? In many ways. So, he's a rising star and we're proud of the brother. And it's good to watch the brother develop and mature. But he represents in many ways the closest thing still to the student perspective, right? He's fresh off of comps and coursework, right? So, and he's younger than Dr. Herman and myself as well. So, and it's those connections, I'm the oldest of us all. That is probably clear, particularly when I don't shave. However, nonetheless. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I want to thank you on behalf of the Chancellor of Western Carolina University, Dr. Brown. I want to thank you on behalf of the Provost's office, Dr. Schwab. On behalf of my dean in the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Kenner, as well as all of the stakeholders and all of the equally interested and vested parties of the GBS program here. And I want to give thanks and acknowledgement to the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation, because we are guests here in their land. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you all. So I'm gonna get started because I've wasted enough time with the formalities. And I wanted to be more of a conversational tone, but I have some questions that will guide our conversation. Broken in three groups: the studying, researching, and teaching of Black peoples, right? So first, we're gonna start with you, Adam, because of the reasons I said. You're the closest to being a student at this point. So if you would briefly describe to us your educational experience, undergraduate, you can take it back briefly to high school K through 12 if you choose, but undergraduate and graduate school.
Yeah, man. Well, first off, both dots, brothers, sisters in the audience, and our non-binary people out there as well, man. I'm just blessed and honored to be here today in front of y'all. It's just so much going on because right now I'm in North Carolina. I'm actually in Riegelwood, North Carolina, not far, from your stomping grounds at Pembroke, way back when last year. And so, it feels good because this is also where, at least on one part of my family side, where in a way history began for me. So it's actually a great way to segue into that because to me, I family reunions were really one of the first educational experiences I ever had. Is just by being around as a jit, as we say back in Florida, what I'm saying, just going around and just like talking to people and being talked to. And so for me, just learning from, OGs in the family about family histories. And, I was talking with my grandfather, from who I'm with here. It's always fascinating thinking about you never meet particular people, but you feel like you know them because of the multitude of stories. And so for me, the different storytelling methods, right? I have a cousin, Dr. Rosalind Jones. She actually wrote her English dissertation at Middle Tennessee State, I believe, in 1983, on folklore and history of the actual patriarch of our family, John William Jacobs. And so, like just thinking like how that was like a huge thing, still is in our family. And so for me, I got to give grace to her because, not only is that the side of the family that I'm with right now, but also the fact that, she has a large thing to do with, why I'm here today as one of the family historians and their storytellers. And then it's like my mother, my brother, my aunts, my aunties, fictive kin, all the thing. And so for me, the fact that I went to Florida Agricultural Mechanical University, October 3rd, 1887, y'all know what it is, you know what I'm saying? So HBCU land. And so just thinking about the myriad of different stories you hear about in terms of the legacy and tradition. So to me, as my brother puts in family forever, you already know. So for me, I'm just thinking like being steeped in there for 5 years, like and at times feel like, damn, why did it take so long? But thinking like, thank God it took that long because I needed a little bit of seasoning. We ain't talking about salt and pepper. We needed some of that adobo, some of that lemon pepper, like, what I'm saying. So for me, being coached in that space at FAM under Dr. Young, and though I didn't take classes with him, Dr. Ellis and Dr. Jackson, and the rest of them, man. So for me, going to FAMU was one of the best experiences I could have ever done. And my brother went to FAM before I did too, so he blazed the trail for me. And so for me, and to just wrap it up real quick, I gotta say that as now a historian of Black women's experiences in the 18th century and 19th century, I got to give it up to two people. One of them being Dr. Theresa Perry, who was the only Black professor I had at Simmons College, now University. And now she's now she, I believe, retired. And so she was the only Black professor I had there. And so me taking the class Race, Resistance, and Resilience, and that being like a real large, like that was the first time I ever heard the term, the person Janet Mock, or a lot of these other figures that we learned in there. And then now it's like, yo, that was the first time I was like, yo, shit, I want to do that. You know what I'm saying? And now, I'm working with, my mentor and someone I look up to so much with Dr. Dunbar. She's the reason why I transferred from the University of Delaware to Rutgers. You know what I'm saying? And so just thinking about, the story nature of Rutgers, but also what she's doing as well right now. And so to me, like I couldn't think of two better people to just give up and think of why I'm here today. And most of them are Black women and Black women scholars and storytellers. So, thank you for letting me go through this little intellectual genealogy. So
well, I mean, we were all grad students once. We understand the enthusiasm, but that's important because that speaks to how mentoring and family experience, and in many ways, the unique position, perhaps not necessarily unique to African Americans, but we do have a unique experience in the importance and the role of storytellers and family historians to the family, and how those people are viewed with a certain amount of respect and viewed from a certain angle. So, for many of us, but I'm thinking it's getting shaky in 2021. We'll talk about that later though, but the Black scholar at one time was a very, very respected figure in the community by all, just as much as the reverend or the business person, indeed. So that's very important. So what about you, Dr. Herman? Briefly describe your educational experience.
Oh, okay. Well, let me first thank you for the invitation to be here, come back to the mountain, at least virtually or whatnot. I can talk a little bit about how I ended up on the mountain or whatever for the first 2 years of school, but I also want to shout out Brother McNeil or whatever. I've been following you on your podcast and stuff like that, and seeing you on Twitter and stuff like that. And I don't think Dr. Walton is just kind of, he's paying you proper homage, man. We looking at you, and you're the next up, and you're doing good work, man. So definitely looking forward to seeing what comes out of your camp and what you're producing, and your contributions to the ways we understand the world, man. And ways we are in the world. As far as the intellectual kind of like genealogy or kind of my educational experience, man, I'm a first generation college student. I went to school with I went to college. My mom drove me up the mountain, dropped me off with my brother and everything like that. And I was standing there in Albright Benton looking around like, what's going on? And trying to figure out my way. I wanted to play football. I tried to, did the little walk-on thing, whatever. But I had the opportunity to kind of like be a student my first semester at Western Carolina after many years of playing football. I knew I wanted to get a degree. I wasn't sure what it was going to be in because I was just in a lot of ways happy to be in college. And I went there, I started out as an accounting major. Which is like way far away from where because I knew that I was like business, I come from a working class family. We're going to get some money, we're going to make it crack. So I was like, let me do this accounting thing. And I was sitting in the accounting classes, maybe my second year. And I remember asking the teacher, I was like, is this what we're going to be doing? If we get an accounting job. I was looking at internships and stuff like that at Ernst & Young or whatever, and things like that. And he was like, yes, Mr. Herman, this is what we're going to be doing. And I was like, this is okay, but this ain't necessarily, there's something else out there for me, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been reading, always a big reader or whatever. I was reading a lot of Harlem Renaissance stuff when I was in high school, reading outside of class and things like that. I was just curious that way. And my mom really supported that, man. I come from a family of folks who value education. My dad retired from the IRS, and his thing about education was you go get an education so you don't have to work as much as I did, so you can go a bit further or whatnot. And this is kind of the I guess the vision of Black families or whatnot or whatever, like always having this value of education and always seeing beyond what's right in front of us. There's a lot of like conversations around mentorships and, this idea that we have to be able to see what it is so we can achieve it. And I don't think that's how it works. I think there's a lot of folks who come from legacies of people who dream big and wanted the best for their folks. And I think my family, and I'm pretty sure people in your family or whatnot, and for the folks who are on, if you talk to your parents or whatnot, or the people in your family, that's what we're doing here, particularly as Black folks, you know, recreating possibilities and kind of exploring those possibilities. And I think that informs a lot of how I ended up in college. But I was sitting in those accounting classes. I was also taking a philosophy class. I was taking a lot of English classes, and in the accounting class, I'm in the back. I'm like, whatever. In the philosophy class, I'm like, yo, I'm in the front. I'm like, what's going on here? And I'm like, okay, this is a type of education or a type of, you know, thinking that I really dig and I really get down on. My Pell ran out, so I couldn't I couldn't stay at Western Carolina. It got really expensive for an out-of-state student. I'm from Georgia. I grew up in Georgia, so that's home for me. And I decided to go back to Georgia State or go to Georgia State because I had a free college. All right. And I was thinking about the things that I was reading. I started reading Cornell West, you know, philosophical stuff when I was, you know, 19 or whatever. And it was blowing my mind. It was a lot at that point. But I was thinking about the things that I was reading. And when I got to Georgia State, I was like, graphic design or Africana studies, because I found out that was a thing there. So I took, you know, a couple of courses in African-American studies, and it clicked. Like, it clicked. I was like, these are the things that I was already kind of interested in, right? I was already doing a lot of this reading on my own and trying to find ways. Even in my English class at Western Carolina, I was writing about Duke Ellington and the Black football coach in Notre Dame and stuff around that time. I was trying to put Black folks' stories into the work because I was interested in those things and understanding what that meant for our world. It didn't sound like that when I was 19 or 20, but that's what I look back at.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to Georgia State, I saw professors, I saw an entire department of folks who were doing this type of work. And I was like, yo, like, you can get a job doing this stuff. Like, I didn't know that was a possibility. And people like, you know, that department is still amazing to this day, Georgia State University African American Studies program. But people like Dr. Akinyele Umoja, who's big in our field or whatever as a historian, is really, you know, Dr. Mukungu Akinyele, Dr. Charles Jones, who established the department at Georgia State, Dr. Arletha Livingston, Dr. Dixon, Dr. Cora Presley. These are all people who shaped generations of folks at Georgia State to go out and get degrees, go out and work in the communities, go out, become lawyers, go out and take what we learned in our classrooms, in our learning spaces, what we learned about in our, you know, social collectives and stuff like that, and be of service to the communities that we come from and the communities where we are. And that stayed with me through my degrees. You know, my travels at Louisville in Pan-African Studies, and even when I was at Michigan State in sociology, I always had my ear to the ground what was going on over in the Black Studies program, because that's the intellectual space that, you know, I was kind of groomed in and that was part of. So I think that brings us up to speed for a little bit.
Indeed. Indeed.
And that's beautiful, man, because one of the good FAMUans, you know, you can find us everywhere. Dr. Shirletta Kitchen, you know what I'm saying, working over there, Pan-African Studies. So that's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
You see them Michigan State Spartans, we popping up on y'all every now and then.
hey, y'all look, y'all got a great genealogy over there too, you know what I'm saying? Y'all even just got the enslaved.org joint, that big old melon joint too that y'all got too. So y'all are just doing amazing things over there.
Yeah, building on the prior work with the databases that Gwendolyn Mildor Hall and Arthur Hawthorne was over there putting together, two of my mentors. Of course, you know, I'm the great Dr. Payroll Dagbovie, so I want to make that clear. That is my chair, my guy, my man, $100,000. You know, as we would say in the Black community when my dad was my age. But nonetheless, definitely, I mean, it's a strong tradition over there in Black studies, Black history, sociology, education, literature to a large degree as well, AFAM history. I mean, this is real strong. And now they're going to be much stronger in gender studies there with some of the new directions. Indeed. And it sounds like very similar to you all, but in different ways, you know, were my experiences that led me to this profession, and why I wanted the skills that being prepared for this profession provides and requires. You know, going to college, my daddy, tradesman. Every Black man got a major in business, right? Similar to you, Khalfani. So for me, it was human resource management. So I ended up double majoring because I couldn't tell my dad no. You know, in Black studies, I took it first semester, freshman year, had no clue what it was, and discovered and found a place, much like Dr. Herman stated, where the books that I was already interested in and reading on my own had value, right? And subject matter and stuff that I was interested in to what I wanted to do in the world, you know, to help Black people be treated less harshly in America, if you want to be honest, right? And, you know, before I knew it, my parents started asking me why I wasn't close to graduating yet. So I had to go and get somebody to evaluate my transcripts. And they said, well, you got a lot of gen eds you got to finish up. It's going to take you about another year and a half. But you got 63 credits in African American studies, and you only needed 33. So that's how I ended up double majoring. And then, you know, I went and lived life and realized that my role I was playing in my family and wanted to play in my family and in my immediate family, and then maybe grow out to the extended family. You know, I wanted to study and research the local community I came from, communities my family came from. You know, a really personal, in many ways, selfish thing, you know, always trying to get the elders in the family to tell me things about our family. And so I decided to return and get a master's degree. But I wanted to still have that particular training and focus on Black people. So I also did a graduate certificate in Black studies and an MA from Eastern Michigan. But then I figured it out and said I need to do this PhD to get paid a little more than I was at a community college. And I ended up doing the dual PhD in history and Black studies, which was a little more work. It sounds a lot more than what it is, but it allowed me to take advantage of those, the fellowships, graduate assistantships, free tuition and a paycheck, health insurance, you know, to take more classes and not be told that I'm taking classes that don't count for nothing. Stop. The dual allowed me to do that, to, you know, do some stuff for my teaching desire. And that was pre-colonial African history, African resistance and anti-colonial movements. Slavery, slave trades. That's why Dr. Hall and Dr. Hawthorne, those my peoples as well, strong peoples. But nonetheless, so I think you all are addressed, because this is about y'all, not myself, the reasons y'all chose to study Black peoples and Black communities, as well as how you approach undergrad and grad school. Those are my follow-up questions. And I think it's solid to say that. So now we're gonna flip it and go with Dr. Herman first. And I'm going to ask this general question, and then I got a couple follow-ups, is what are your research interests and or current research projects?
Oh man, I feel like I got like new ideas like every other day, man. Because there's so much going on, broadly, my research interests. I'm looking at I examine a lot of about social inequality, particularly racial inequality in urban spaces, and thinking about how people of African descent respond and navigate inequality. So that could be in terms of like, you know, doctoral research was around recreation centers and stuff like that, and looking at how young Black kids as a marginalized group, people with less power in our society or whatever, how they experience state institutions. So looked at recreation centers as an extension of the state apparatus or whatnot, and trying to understand, you know, if everybody's saying that this is a great place for young people or whatever, what do the young people in there say about their experiences there? And how can that particular entry point teach us about how this institution actually works, and about how young people kind of utilize their agency to, make demands about, what kind of spaces they want, what kind of lives they want to live, and who they are in our society and stuff like that. So a lot of my work takes as a starting point, the value of black folks' perspectives. So that is a starting point. That's a given for me. I don't think that I spend a lot of time trying to justify or rationalize why this is an important space to kind of start, because I think that's what Black Studies does. That is part of the game. And I find when I move across disciplines and stuff like that, that becomes a question that I got to engage with. So a lot of stuff about social inequality. I do some work around popular culture and stuff like that, gender analysis and hip hop. And I'm starting to work on some project around public art and looking at Black artist traditions and how public art, I'm saying public art, but I'm thinking about murals and stuff like that and graffiti and stuff like that, things that come out of Black and brown cultures or whatever, urban communities or whatnot, how those things become part of the ways that cities kind of rebuild themselves and how they market themselves and stuff like that. And to what extent Black artists are involved in that process. And, what I'm seeing is there's a lot of some early stuff or whatever. There's a lot of Black folks are being brought to the table either after the fact or not at all. But the type of art that's being done is stuff that we would normally associate with, graffiti and Black artist tradition. So I'm trying to understand how Black folks, Black artists respond to kind of the barrier making and the construction of public space as a way to kind of like think about like, who are these places being made for? Where are Black folks at in the future? And like as cities kind of remap themselves or whatever, what's happening to Black folks in those processes. So those are the kind of projects and the questions that I'm always interested in. Thinking about how Black folks make space for themselves and how they navigate and respond to structural inequality and kind of power dynamics in our society.
Okay. All of that sounds interesting, extremely interesting and important. So I'm going to probe it a little bit. So what made you pick those particular topics or projects, or made you ask those particular questions?
Let me plug myself in real quick before we get lost.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah, man. The whole working at home stuff is different. Man, to be honest with you, like the questions that I ask, a lot of the stuff that I ask has to do with kind of looking around. I've always been kind of a curious person or whatever, and I'm looking around and I'm asking questions about, what's going on here. So I remember like when I was at the recreation center space, actually, if I look backwards, right, it's easy to see in hindsight, but I've always done work around young people in education, right? So when I was at Georgia State, we did our little our service learning projects, and I worked at an after school program, working with kids on computer literacy. I ain't know nothing about computer literacy and Photoshop and stuff like that, but I knew I wanted to go that was a place that sounded cool. And I think in the back of my mind, even when I was at Louisville and then at Michigan State, I was, helping with mentoring programs and stuff like that. And I think that that's always been there. And it's thinking about what role can I play to help open up doors for folks who are coming after? Because graduating, from high school out of, Gwinnett County or whatnot, there was a lot, even my brothers and stuff like that, I'm looking around and I'm thinking about how much talent, how much gifts, how many gifts people are carrying around with them. And when I went to college, looking around over my shoulders and realizing that there's a lot of folks who had the skills and the talents and stuff who were not there. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yo, it's not for like, because I know them, whatever, they're my people or whatever. I was like, it's not for a lack of like talent or ability on their part or whatever. There's something else that's happening. I think that was like kind of an early click for me to try to figure out, well, what is happening in the institutions, what's happening in our societies where doors open for some people and closed for other folks.
So you would say that it was a result of your personal experiences and concerns that you personally had as a Black person?
Yeah, I think you talked about it even with Adam. You know, the ways that our personal lives kind of inform the ways that we see the world or whatever shows up in our work. And I find it hard to believe that a lot of our scholarship, a lot more than what folks would like to admit, comes from somewhere that has that kind of a personal attachment. So I think a lot of this work just comes from looking around and kind of trying to understand why stuff is happening and how can we, improve those things. I think that's where a lot of my work is motivated by.
Yeah, and I think it's important for students to hear that, right? That they can make a career or they can enhance their skills for a chosen career by exploring Black studies, because it fosters that, right? We all have questions. They all have questions. They wouldn't take the classes that they take that are available to them, the few that exist, right? Black content, Black folk art classes, or classes where there's a space for them to ask those questions, I should say, or explore those questions, no matter how few they are in between, right?
I think one of the things that happened, and I'll keep this part brief because I want to hear from Brother Adam. One of the things that Black Studies allows us to do, right, particularly in these spaces, like whereas when I was in that English class with, the professor there trying to kind of not shoehorn in, but like, hey, I want to study this particular phenomenon. She's like, cool, go with it. Yeah. But there wasn't a lot of room to kind of develop and nurture that from a content and subject matter expertise. When I was in my Africana Studies class, like I'm asking a question about, let's say Duke Ellison, because that's what I was writing about when I was, in that English class or whatever. I'm asking a question about Duke or whatever. Yeah, the person in the class is like, yeah, and then X, Y, Z, and like can kind of build me out and say, okay, this is where you need to go find some more information or whatever. Or have you thought about it like this in relationship to this? And being in that space allows us to build in ways that like people who might be in other disciplines or not have that type of training, they don't have that knowledge base to kind of extend the discourse. And that's not a knock on them. It's more about what Black Studies offers to students who want to learn about Black folks' experiences throughout the diaspora. Like there's subject matter experts that can say, yes, this is what you're interested in, and here's something to go, resources and help you kind of cultivate that viewpoint. So that's what I got a lot as an undergrad. And then as a graduate student that I brought with me to my PhD program in sociology. By the time I got there, I was like, yeah, I know how to do this work. And I felt confident in that.
And you did it and you are doing it. And that gentrification, because that's where a lot of it's going to be interacted, that sociology stuff going to come out in you. Because that, with the street art and the makeover. And them spaces you and I like to hang out, because we hung out in them type spaces in Lansing, where they would have those murals there. So that's even personal to us, as in we're in these spaces and we're noticing that Black artists and Black people are being pushed out, in that. So Adam, so what are your research interests or current research project, i.e. your dissertation, buddy?
Hey man, I will say this, man. I've been blessed to be in spaces that nurture my creativity and my mind. And so I say that because I will be talking about my dissertation, but I also feel like there's so much more that there's there for. And that's why I love writing for Black Perspectives, the academic blog of the African American Intellectual History Society, because it provides graduate students and other scholars like myself a space to think out loud within 1,200 to 1,500 words and be able to go back and forth with people on Twitter and in other spaces. And it also gives me a plug because Brother Herman brought up the podcast, New Books in African American Studies, a channel on the New Books Network. And there was a book drop yesterday that I've been waiting on for a minute from Dr. Regina M. Bradley, chronicling Stankonia, the rise of the hip hop South. Just came in. Thank you, Mama, for mailing it. It's a beautiful cover. You know what I'm saying? And so I brought that up because for me, I was driving actually back from Harris Teeter last night while listening to Kiefse Layman and Regina, Dr. Bradley rather, discussing the book, right, through Taurus Books. And in Atlanta. And so it was just making me think about like not only Outkast and the importance of music, but also the intersections between hip hop and the study of slavery, right? And how hip hop artists over time have discussed a slavery and imagery and such. And also makes me think about pop culture, because one of my favorite shows that was only on for two seasons was Underground through WGN America. And so to me, I am one of these people where I've broken the chain proverbially of like not watching reality television show or pop culture, because to me sometimes people think that Black studies scholars, African American history scholars, that we boring, that we just out here just all in the books all the time and that's all we think about. And it is a major facet. Just ask anybody that know me. I'm very much about my books, but I'm also one that's also very much involved in wanting to make plain to the different viewers that are in our spaces to know that Black history is made everywhere and it intersects everywhere. And so whether or not I'm talking about Love and Hip Hop, or if I'm talking about Black Crew Chicago, or if I'm talking about, you know, Underground, or if I'm talking about Roots, or if I'm talking about, you know, any of these shows, there's a way to bring it from the 18th century on into the present. And as a scholar who really, you know, I was born and raised in Florida, man. So, you know, thinking about the different flags that Florida has held ever since Ponce de Leon, and thinking about Leon County, Florida, where I went to college, and thinking about how national myths, right? I've spent a lot of time working with the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so thinking I've worked for the feds, not, you know, not them feds, not them feds, but, you know, a part of the federal, you know, agencies. And so just thinking about, you know, even my, you know, place in trying to interpret Black history in spaces where oftentimes you ain't gonna see no Black people, it makes you think a little deeper about how is it that if I know a fact, how do I tell this person in a particular way that's gonna get them? And to me, that's a particular way that you can take that public history and take it into the classroom, because as we know, you know, like I said, like I write about, you know, this revolutionary era, right, where we go from the American Revolution into the War of 1812. And so for me, that's the formative time of the United States. And so I didn't need the 1619 Project from Nicole Hannah Jones to tell me about, you know, the entanglement of or the entanglement of slavery into the U.S. Constitution or into, you know, the foundations of the American Revolution. But what it did was provide a larger platform for people who can discuss it in the particular way. And so for me, that's what I want to do, is to discuss the national foundations and how African Americans, how Black folks, how African people made decisions, right? We're decision makers, right? So whether or not you call that agency, whether or not you call that freedom, whether or not you know, depending on the term that you want to use, that at the end of the day, Black folks had to make particular decisions based on the contingencies of the moment that they were living in, because you didn't know when freedom was ever going to come. So if you hear that the British are coming around your area and you have the opportunity to get freedom from them, because a lot of my work writes about Black women that sided with the British. So for me, trying to write about Black folks' entanglements in empire, and also how they, you know, use empire to gain certain privileges and freedoms, while also fighting against empire, and to really think about Black people as just regular decision makers. And also say, and I believe I got this from Dr. Tiffany Lethabo King, who wrote an amazing book, Black Shows, about, you know, Native and Black studies, where it was on a talk that I heard her give a couple weeks ago, where she said any kind of thought in terms of ideas that we might have made in the 20th or 21st century, enslaved people were thinking about something similar at the time, because they had to think about the world in which they were living in, that they were thinking beyond their present circumstances, right? In kind of like a Thurman kind of sense, but also in a way that it's like, if you don't know when freedom is going to come, you have to make decisions based upon what you know in the moment, right? And so that's why for me, you know, thinking about people who did run away, is, think about, today was actually the day, I believe, that Ona Judge, right, the woman who ran away from the Washington family, today was the day that she died, I believe, in the 1840s, right? So thinking about her on a day like today, someone who fought the most powerful person in the new United States and beat his ass. Ain't that luck, right? And so for me, trying to write about as much as we can about the Black world, to know that Black people was thinking about so many things within their confinement as enslaved people, but and to try to stay with that and think about survival, and to think about Black people were joyful, not because of slavery, but in light of it, that they were still people, well-rounded, that despite the depravity of the people, of ultimately the white supremacists that were holding them in bondage, no matter if it was on a large plantation of 500 or of 2 in Appalachia, that no matter what, that they were still trying to find their way through the world, trying to have babies, trying to have sex, trying to have pleasure, trying to laugh, because I think there's a problem when we only privilege those kind of ideas for free people, right? People who are legally free in that way. Because what we do is we say that these enslaved people were incapable, right? And so for me, trying to say that we've been fighting the system forever, right? We got bad guys and bad women, bad people all the way through. But at the end of the day, them there's people, man. And so for me, it's just so fun being able to write about us, center us.
Indeed.
That I'm looking at us and I ain't looking at them. They there. But I'm looking at what are we thinking, right?
All right? Indeed. That leads me to a follow-up to both of you all. And both of you all have mentioned approaching the research from community-centered, Black-centered, what I would call an African-centered. This is a research methodology different than the theoretical paradigm, which is different, which will be Afrocentricity. But this culturally centered approach, right? Privileging the voices of your subjects, for those who do historical studies, your historical collaborators, for those who do contemporary studies, your contemporary collaborators, right? And that is central to the Black Studies research methodology, right? That cultural centeredness and centering and privileging the voice of your subjects, not discounting archival research, but in conjunction, because in many people approach the study of Black people solely using archival research without the voices of and centering the voice of that. So beyond that, what other methodologies and or theoretical paradigms do you use in your research? And we'll go back to Dr. Herman first for that follow-up.
All right, so I'm thinking about for me, the thing that Black Studies equipped me with, and the thing that I always impress upon my students is Black people know stuff, right? Black people have ways of thinking about the world that are specific to their location in the world, right? So, the $5 word is epistemology, right? There's an epistemological, but we know stuff, right? Your mama knows stuff. Your mama make ideas about the world. Your grandma has ideas about the world. And we lean on that knowledge or whatever to kind of understand what's going on. And that knowledge is distinct in some places, or it broadens the ways that we can understand our world beyond what the academy sometimes likes to limit us to. For me, throughout the years, from undergrad moving forward, I've had this kind of interesting kind of engagement with Black women as thinkers and Black feminist thought and whatnot, and thinking about the ways those tools help us recognize the way that these structures kind of work together to either constrain the ways that we think about the world, all right, to inform the ways that our perspectives are unique in the world, and about how power operates. And I think that's probably been the most, I'm always kind of questioning and kind of keeping my eyes on power. If you watch The Wire or whatever, it's like my man said, follow the money. You follow the money, you find everything else. But if you pay attention to the way that power works or whatever, I think that's one of the ways that I'm seeing how society works. And it's through that lens. And Black feminist thought has always and continues to kind of give me those ideas, or ways to kind of look at the world. And I'd be remiss without saying, you know, one of the things that kind of drew me to sociology was reading Du Bois and thinking about the ways that Du Bois throughout, you know, his 93 years of life, you know, as a historian who helped generate another field and create another field of social sciences. You know, he wasn't doing it for the clout. He was doing it to try to figure out how our world works and where are Black people in this space and how do we move towards, you know, some sense of liberation, you know, that moves us beyond the space. And I think, you know, a lot of us aspire to be, you know, him or use him as kind of one of the beacons or whatnot. But thinking about the different ways, the different methodologies that he utilized, you know, surveys, interviews, archival stuff. And there's this bricolage approach where you're not committed to just one way of doing things. You're using what it is. What's the question? What am I trying to find out? And what's the best way to get at it?
Indeed.
So for
that
me,
reminds me of something I learned real quick, and then I get you back to it because it's right on what you're saying. From one of you and Du Bois's frat brothers at Michigan State, Dr. Austin Jackson. He said, Kalonji, look at analytical paradigms as various tools in the toolbox. Put as many tools you can in that toolbox, but you got to use the right tool for the problem. You know, and then he gave me the generic old school analogy of a hammer and a saw, you know, that blah. But that toolbox analogy was very, very valuable and important. And that helped me get the understanding of Black studies in such more broader and profound way. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, he's right. You know, load up as much as you can. You know, it's a tool. You can use it, you can have it, and it might not be the right thing to use at that particular point. I want to like circle back around to kind of the Black feminist perspective a bit. And I think a lot of that kind of trust and that engagement with those ideas comes from the people that are in my life. You know, my mom. You know, my mom is the sharpest, just sharp from the top to the bottom. That's who I go to, like, to help make sense of stuff like that. And it's shown up in the work that I've read and the things that I've been introduced to, and the colleagues and I've, you know, friends and stuff that I've made throughout the years. You know, that's the space, one of the spaces, or, you know, analytical paradigms that they're pulling from to make sense of the world. And it has yet to kind of steer me wrong if I'm trying to understand where Black folks are.
Indeed. All right, Adam, I pose the same to you, brother.
Yeah, man. And so I would say I'm more of the historian in particular ways, but I will say that you know, being trained by effectively all Black women scholars, man, it's, you know, in terms of Black feminist lenses on the world, not only as a historian of Black women's history, but also just thinking generally about, you know, going back to the question of power, and also how just because we use a word like freedom, that doesn't mean that everyone's using it in the same way. And also freedom for what and to do what, right? And so to me, thinking about it in terms of like the questions that I ask, to try to delve deeper into the question, I think is, you know, like the question of, you know, what were Black people thinking about, what were Black women thinking about that wasn't about citizenship, right? That, you know, that obviously freedom and agency and citizenship are often important, you know, words and subtitles of books that we see published every year. But I also think that too, you know, especially reading the recent book, Wicked Flesh from Dr. Jessica Marie Johnson, Wicked Flesh, Black Women, Freedom and Intimacy in the Atlantic World, where she's talking about, you know, the kinds of freedom that African women knew about on the continent before they ever were trafficked into, for her book, would be contemporary Louisiana. And so for me, just thinking about the Black feminist lens and also Black feminist scholars, and just trying to just learn and trying to just soak up as much as I can, because like I said, like I honestly feel like, you know, like I said, freedom and intimacy and all these different questions and themes are things that are universal. But the problem is we don't give, right? And I say give, but I think that we don't allow oftentimes in our classrooms and in our spaces to think openly about this, right? And that's why I think Chronicling Stankonia, going back to, you know, Dr. Bradley's book, is so dope, because it talks about in a medium like hip hop, which gets put out to be so, quote unquote misogynistic, where do Black women come in and kind of think about themselves within the music, right? And so to me, just thinking about the different ways that Black feminist lenses, Black feminist thought and Black feminist lenses lend itself to so many different spaces across continuums, across worlds. It just helps you to just get excited about the kinds of worlds that we can imagine to bring into the world. So for me, Black feminist thought also is world making, right? And empire breaking, right? And so to me, those are things that to me are very much in line with the values of Black studies then and also now, because it's Black studies is insurgent, right? And so I see some people in the participants, so maybe don't listen to that part, but let's be honest, right? It is what it is. And so just thinking about trying to tap into that history and tap into the ancestors. There's also thing in terms of methodology, ancestors are a methodology, I think, right? And to try to tap into them and try to conjure them in the work too, because they're always there, trying to help us. It's the question of if we're available to listen to them.
So any of you guys use critical race theory?
You know what? I can't, well, not formally. Because I also feel like there's a way that you can use something even if you never even necessarily knew that you were at the particular time. But I'll just say for the confines of this conversation, I haven't necessarily.
Okay. What about you, Dr. Herman?
It's always like similarly. It's always there. Like I read it. Like I'm engaged with that field or whatnot. It's not the primary lens about which ways I look. It's not the primary lens in which I look through things, but it's there. It's there in the mix or whatnot. And it's hard. I saw somebody talk about this maybe on Twitter or whatnot, thinking about when they read books and how they come into your intellectual kind of thought or whatnot, or the ways that you think about the world. And how do you separate? How do you identify what's fresh on mind and where for us who've been in academia or whatever for however many years, like there's something that we read first year of grad school that's still circulating, and it becomes like a foundation for how we think about the world, even though sometimes it might not be named that way.
Indeed.
Theory sits in there like that.
Facts. Oh, I totally agree. What about intersectionality? Adam, you can...
I was waiting for a time when I was down here. I got to say, my bad, bro. I'm on mute. But no, I feel like I've been seeing this all the time. I feel like it's a matter of time. So here we are. But intersectionality, goes to race, class, power, right? You know what I'm saying? Like to even just go back to something like 1971, when Angela Davis, when she was literally, confined, is writing about Black enslaved women, right? And really one of the first people to actually do that, or even to go back to a Woman of the South in 1892, literally talking about, the intersectional lens. And so for me, I think it's, it's just, yeah, definitely using it, because I think that no matter what you're talking about, you have to think that Black women's interactions with the world are different in certain ways than Black men for a myriad of different reasons, i.e. race, class, and gender working together. And also doing my best to also use it in the way at which it was supposed to be used originally. Because I also feel like there's a way that we've gone so far that we've got kente cloth and intersectionality being used in Congress, and it ain't even exactly the way that it was meant to be used and abused in certain ways. So
well, that's part of the game. They did that with Black Power.
Yeah, I think
LeBron James, I love you, brother, but doggone.
I mean, Richard Nixon, he said Black Power.
James Brown.
Yeah, the intersectional pieces, again, it's always there. Once it became part of the kind of the toolkit and the ways I understand the world, it's always there. That's why I'm like, okay, we're looking at young people. We don't often think about age as part of like kind of the dynamics of power or whatnot, but what space in our society do young people have the power to determine what happens? And those spaces are few and far between. So we think about, as young people, we were all young people at one point. Some of us still are, Adam, we still hold it down for us. you navigate the world as a young person thinking about power dynamics. What can I get away with here, and how can I enforce my will here and whatnot? So that's part of the game, and it shows up in my teaching. You know, how I locate myself. But it's not just about these kind of identities, right? Like I encourage my students always to think about, like, one, where this idea, you know, is coined, where it's named, where it comes from. The fact that Black folks have been thinking about these things from time before it had a name, right? But also to understand, okay, that legacy, but how we utilize this stuff, and this hits, you know, what Adam's talking about. Part of the intersectional dynamics, not about identity, like just like, oh, I'm Black, or male, middle to upper class, you know, middle. It's not about those things. It's about, okay, what does that mean in the context of this large society? Where does that place you? What privileges does it afford to you? What types of oppression are you more likely to experience as a result of the confluence of those intersection forms of systems of dominance and power and oppression? Like, if you miss that part of it, the structural piece about it, you're not utilizing it till its fullest potential and in the ways that it was intended to be used.
Indeed, because I also use intersectionality when I'm studying notions of personhood and also dealing with masculinity in my studies. I use, and so don't forget the scholar that introduced me, well, activist, I should say, the soldier that introduced me to that notion, and that was Claudia Jones. You know,
say that name.
Yeah, and then I made the connection to the ideas that Angela Davis and Kimberly Crenshaw made a couple decades later. But, you know, by revisiting their scholarship and realizing, okay, I understand what they're saying more, because Claudia broke it down to me in a particular way that I could get. So, you know, reading the wide array of people, right, who use these methodologies and theoretical paradigms in different ways can help us even better. It helps us even understand one another's work. You know, those different scholars' work. And the point, when I reread Blues, Women, and Feminist Legacies after rereading the Davies biography and then the edited volume with her documents, when I reread that for Dr. Stokes at Michigan State University, hardcore Marxist Leninist. And, you know, so yeah. And when I reread it, I was like, wow, I understand it so much more now and got to it. And then I also want to say that that's the thing about Black studies. So, you know, you brothers, you know, you have your strong, your go-to tools, for lack of a better way to put it, that allows you to think in ways to ask better questions. You know, would that be accurate? You know, and then there's other theoretical paradigms that's used in Black studies that may not necessarily be for what we're doing at this moment in time in research, that we may have to use as much, you know, but another student, another scholar, for the questions they ask, might need to. For example, they may need to pull out that Afrocentricity based upon the questions that they ask. And my non-Marxist structural analysis isn't gonna help them answer the questions that they're asking, because that's my other go-to: critical race theory, intersectionality, and non-Marxist structural analysis. Those are my bread and butters. I'm gonna keep it real, for what I've been researching since 2011 and writing on and publishing on. You know, this class-based and race-based grassroots working class movement, Black high school students, a Black labor union in Detroit, you know, who used Marxist-Leninist analysis to make sense of what they were trying to do with their movement, you know. So that's, you know, that's important, you know. And I had to then, after being chastised, and Michigan State got a lot of great scholars there, you know, just like Rutgers. If you're studying Black women history, and Rutgers is the place to be, it's like heaven. The runner-up, I would say, is Michigan State. With my peoples. You mentioned Jessica Johnson. She was there, did a postdoc when I was there. We go to the dang on Slavery and Slave Trades Conference, be the only Negroes from America there. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, Dr. LaShawn Harris, Vanessa Holden, it's just, there's so many. Of course, Dr. Nwande Achebe. I mean, it's just the work and the caliber and, you know, asking great questions leading to new and original research, you know? So that leads me to teaching, and we've alluded to it once or twice. And because, like myself, Dr. Herman has to teach multiple days every week, and you get to chill, I hope, and focus on your scholarship, be it your dissertation, as well as, you know, the other forms of scholarship that you're performing. But you might have to TA. We've all been there. Wasn't the best experience, even working with great professors, because you'd be like, man, I got to do this stuff, and I'd rather be doing my research. But anyway, we'll start with Dr. Herman. Well, I had a daughter and an older son. I just had a daughter. I was like, yeah, I got to get up out of here. So I had to wrap up my PhD, and I got a job offer. So, you know, I had to move. But we'll start with you, Dr. Herman, and then we'll let Adam chime in.
So as far as teaching, which one, like, so.
Yeah, your experiences, your approaches to teaching about Black people and Black communities.
All right. So I'm looking at my notes, some notes. I was rereading a piece for my contemporary theory class, Racecraft, by the field system, one historian, one sociologist, or whatever. And we'll be talking about that next week. And one of the things that I pulled out of there was this quote that says, if the goal of research is to learn about the nature of our world, then research only fulfills itself in close connection with teaching. So this notion that, like, so we're trying to learn about the world and understand how this world operates. That's a lot of what I think sociology does. I think that's what scholarship does in general. Good scholarship is trying to understand our world around us. And at the very least, I think Black studies trying to understand it, change it, emancipation, with that kind of political liberatory thrust. And the ways that kind of like shows up in my classroom is thinking about learning in community, right? There's a bunch of stuff that I know because I've lived, I've read, I've studied, there's a lot of stuff that we bring to the table in terms of like knowledge and stuff like that. But I also understand that I have blind spots. There are things that I don't know enough about. There's things that I don't know anything about. And I engage, in group chats with my frat brothers and stuff like that and other friends to help fill in those gaps and to kind of, sharpen each other. And the same thing, I bring that same focus to that same energy to my classrooms. I tell my students, I know stuff, like that's why I'm in this position or whatever, but that doesn't mean that I'm the only person in this room that's bringing something to the table. So when we talk and when we learn, this is a collaborative exercise. You're filling in, you're bringing something to the table, your classmates are bringing something to the table, and we're in this space trying to figure something out together. How do we leave this room or this space? Now we're in Zoom or whatever. How do we log off with a little bit more in our tank than what we came with? And that might be information. That might be a new way of thinking about something, or a sharpened way of thinking about something, or thinking about a different way to approach a question or an idea about our social world. And I think that community ethos or whatnot is in part defined by what I saw modeled in a lot of my classrooms, both good and bad. Some of the things that I did not like, I try to stay away from those things, sage on the stage type stuff. But in the best learning environments that I was in, whether they were in school or in community spaces, was about this kind of collaborative approach that everybody has something valuable to kind of contribute to the learning.
Indeed. For my students listening, you see, I don't just make this stuff up, because that's my speech at the beginning of every semester to my students, what you just said. And I try my best to do exactly that. Then I'm going to follow up with a quick question to you, and then we're going to go to Mr. McNeil, because it's related to why I frame what you just said to my students because of this reality here. We often have to discuss and teach about not just beautiful things, but the worst of the worst, the most ugliest of the ugliest things in the human experience when we're teaching about Black experience in the United States of America in particular, but we can expand it beyond that, but just there. So, how do you approach that reality?
Well, it's, I think the language that some folks use is like difficult conversations, and I don't really play with that language, right? Like it ain't difficult. Like
Exactly.
this is the narrative. Like this is what we're dealing with. So I think it's important to kind of deal with it head on, and to give it the proper respect of what it is. This is a moment. If we talk right now, my students are reading Barracoon. This is a moment in history, and this is a moment in history. This is a story, a micro story that gives you a really interesting, unique insight into enslavement, and it muddies the water a little bit too, which is one of the things I really enjoy. And they got, it's like, well, how did that happen? And did they selling their own people? And it becomes a moment to say, hey, how were folks at that particular point in time looking at each other?
Indeed.
In that space or whatnot. And it's about kind of saying, okay, well, it's a difficult part. What makes it difficult? And what's the narrative on the table? Where are the facts that we can establish? And let's deal with that. But I don't think it's necessary to kind of shy away from those things. Even the contemporary moments, a lot of folks are thinking about on Twitter and, in other spaces, how do I talk about, the election? And how do I talk about, January 6th? January 6th is my birthday, man. The folks was up there in the Capitol acting a whole fool, man. How do we talk about that in the classroom? We go and we talk about it. What is it that the students want to bring to the table? What is it that's driving? What questions are you asking about it? And we deal with that as best we can. But I don't know that there's a particular type of a gloved, sensitive approach to it that I'm willing to kind of take. I just treat the conversation with a level of respect and invite people into the conversation and say, what is it that's driving you? What are you curious about? And that's where we go.
Indeed. So Adam, Mr. McNeil, what are you? I don't want to keep calling him Dr. Herman and keep calling you Adam.
It's all good. I'm gonna get there.
But how do you approach teaching about Black people?
Yeah, no, this is great. I was actually a friend of mine, Cassie, she's still all right. So I was actually in Cassie's Black Women's History class earlier this week. So one of the things I say that I won't do is go over time. So that's what I'm saying. But in all honesty, so for me, I think teaching, first of all, one of the things I noticed, right? It was actually it was subtle for some, but it was so big for me. Even just your naming of what we're doing today, studying, researching, and teaching who? We're talking about African Americans. Are you talking about African people? I love the choice that you just said, Black people. Because I actually think like there's actually a way in which, and in my job, I always love to weave in the ways in which it just makes me feel so smart. But there's a way that people will just use every other word, right? I think that there is context in which African American is important to use. There's context in which African people is important to use. And I think that there's also a way that the entirety, you can always call us Black people. And there's a way I feel like a lot of times in the classroom, and when I think classroom, I'm not talking about in the academic space that we're usually in with our number of students that we call our students. We're talking on Twitter. We're talking about at the gas station. If people see me wearing this, and if people trying to figure out what in the world is, they say Indians, no, I say Caucasians, right? Thank you, Bomani Jones. And so for me, I think that teaching people in terms of just naming practices, citational practices in the classroom is so important, because going back to Brother Herman bringing up Zora Neale Hurston with Barracoon, I went to church in Edenville, right? That's where my home church is, you know what I'm saying, where I grew up. And so someone like Zora Neale Hurston is obviously important for a number of different reasons. But Barracoon, just thinking about like the times when I've been mad reading. There have been times when I've been sad. There are other times where there are not as many when I've just been outright, just blatantly like furious. And I remember reading that on a couch somewhere and thinking like, damn, bro, like this brother Cujo Lewis, like, yo. And there's a way that you can feel him living through the page, right? In a way that other scholars in the contemporary sense and historically have not. And so for me, thinking about teaching, using primary sources, right, in the classroom, that yes, interweaving, secondary, but going to the source, right? We want to talk about people running away. Have you ever seen a runaway slave ad? Oh, people, even when I was at Walmart, I remember 2018 when I first got to the Smokies, and I did a little baby sociological, joint, saying like why I'm here, all that, why this brother with the locks, why that brother up in here. And one of the things I remember doing was talking to folk, and just actual like casual conversation with Walmart workers. And I remember a white dude was like really just kind of dumbfounded that talking about slavery up in, it was in, the one over in Colorweed, right across from the Sonic cookout right down there. I know that. I miss it. And so, what I'm saying, I just remember thinking like, damn, you don't know the fact that love name that you see everywhere up and down 74 and all that, you don't know that was the most important in enslaving family west of Buncombe County. So that means you have no understanding of the historical wrongs that happen here, if you just casually don't even know. And what do you do to debunk that? Take them to the primary source, where James Robert Love is literally putting in the Asheville, I think it was the Asheville Times or one of the contemporary newspaper in Asheville, North Carolina, brother name, enslaved person running away. A word. Okay, so this brother's really out here trying to take the people. And so for me, just going back to Brother Herman, finding out what is it that they want to learn in this particular class, and also depends on your class that you're in. So for me, thinking about what are the kinds of questions, how can you try to deepen it in the contemporary sense, because I feel like any kind of topic that we're going to talk about has something happening right now with historical relevance. I don't care where you are. The kind of questions that you ask in the American Southwest might be different, but monuments nationally are a problem. Confederate monuments ain't really a thing out there, but the question of Spanish colonialism is. So trying to figure out, no matter where we go, these overall questions, we can deepen it historically in their understanding, while also touching upon how it's affecting their day to day without them even knowing. So that's why for me, teaching is so fun. It gives me energy. And I hope it's coming out right now. And so I just love being in a classroom, virtually or otherwise, because I feel like every day that I get the opportunity that God blesses me with a day to breathe, that's the opportunity to teach. I was watching Judas and the Black Messiah with my granddad, born in 1940. He didn't really know much about Fred Hampton. So as we're talking and watching the film, right, I understand people have different understanding of the film, good or bad, but I also feel like there's a way it's an introduction to more, right?
Well, and that's and your use and your ability to transform it into that. Any piece of art that goes to your teaching skill, that goes to your teaching pedagogical chops and your skill. It's like being a rapper. It's, get the same information, but you could just spit it better than the next rapper. I mean, in many ways. And that's important because many things, perhaps because of their flaws, make them great tools for teaching or sparking conversations. And I'm glad you led to something that I wanted to open it up and expand this notion of teaching and learning and researching Black peoples. And it's like a challenge I see in the Black community, in America, period. But we're talking about Black people, so I don't have to qualify that or apologize for it. So in the Black community, right? And it's young people, and in many ways, people all, but particularly young people, they're seeking knowledge. They're seeking knowledge about the Black experience, Black history, Black ideologies, Black philosophies, Black spiritualities, spiritual systems, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, much more than what I experienced 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was 20 years old, right? These young people seem to be more and more interested in actively seeking out those things than my generation was. Nonetheless, however, that leads to the vulnerabilities in the dark side of bad information, misinformation, accidentally, but which is a problem, but deliberately, the con artists, or people who are being paid to push certain narratives and certain information, and cloaking themselves in presenting this Black information, right? And so I'm not gonna really say no names because my point isn't to bash those brothers, but I will say that people who follow those things, I watch all that crap on YouTube because my students end up asking me. I teach Black history and Black studies. If they gonna ask anybody, they gonna ask Dr. Walton, particularly the Black students, right? They're going with Dr. Walton. I saw this on the internet. Be it be something on Sonetta TV, be I guess I am saying names, be it Young Pharaoh, be it Dane Calloway, be it Brother Polite, be it the most credible of them all in regards to scholarship is also you could argue perhaps maybe the most dangerously problematic in certain ways, but Dr. Umar Johnson. If he sticks to the educational psychology and all that, he's spot on pretty much every time. When he ventures off to other things, he gets in trouble. Just like Brother Herman was saying, in which I know when I tell people all the time, particularly graduate students, just because you got this degree don't mean you're the expert on everything Negro, right? You ain't got to speak on everything, right? But nonetheless, it's that danger where our people are getting this bad information. How has that impacted your teaching, or if it has at all? I know it has impacted mine. I generally, over the last 3 or 4 years, spend about 1/5 of the total class time unlearning them some of that stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll unload the clip real quick. I'll leave it. But no, like, to be honest, like, and I think this goes to the question of like community, like the different ways in which Black studies like is involved, right? You see Dr. Carr, with a hunter, on their program, and so for me, I think that the different ways in which we come into community, virtually and in person, I think is important to go here because we're in community with people who think that, right? And in the classroom too. And so for me, it's why I try to be involved in like questions of pop culture, because there's a way in which, going to the last person that you mentioned, Dr. Umar Johnson, or Umar Johnson, depending on who you talk to, where they will bring a book, they'll bring a citation, or not a citation, but a video or these other things. And so to me, I think part of being a part of the Black intellectual tradition is taking people's ideas for what they are and engaging them in you would hope good faith, but also realizing that there are people that are con artists. There are many Bill O'Neills out here that are in different ways. And Bill O'Neill, for those who don't know, was the person whose information gave the FBI information to murder Chairman Fred Hampton. And so for me, I think that there are ways that you can always counteract that with more and more information. But I also think that there's a way that information alone will not save us, because I think that there are some people that, unfortunately, that you're just never going to reach, and being okay with that, because I think there's a way we can't be Superman or Superwoman or super person. Can't reach everybody, but I think trying and engaging the ideas, I think puts us in good standing with the world, because those kind of folks, man, you try to stay away from, but also they're gonna find you eventually. So you might as well learn how to live amongst them too. So
Indeed. Brother Herman?
I remember a couple of students when I was adjuncting at Georgia State while I was finishing up my dissertation. A couple of students in my the research methods course brought in Umar Johnson. Dr. Herman, I was like, I'm not a doctor yet. Dr. Herman, don't worry about that. What do you think about Umar Johnson? I'm like, and it was probably one of the first times it's, they brought that to the table. It's like, yo, we got to deal with this. And I think it's the approach that I take with any type of information, depending on then the type of approach I take with any type of information is to look at it, right? We got to set it on the table and let's take a look at it. What's the validity? What is this person talking about? What's the message? All right, what's the validity of that message? You know, what evidence is this person bringing to the table to kind of support their stuff or whatever, and walking through that kind of like that critical examination, not to like, and I'm thinking about a generous reading. What are these people saying on their own terms? And like, let's acknowledge that. And then let's put that in conversation with some other ideas or whatnot that may help round this out. And I don't think I ever walk into a conversation with any students or anybody, with anybody, you know, that I'm engaged in conversation with trying to change their mind. Mm-hmm. I have an argument, I have a view of the world, and here's I'm gonna lay my argument out, you lay your argument out, and we'll let the cards fall where they may or whatever. And for students, I think particularly in this particular moment where you got YouTube and you got all the circulation of videos and stuff like that, you know, things go far very quickly. And sometimes it's incomplete information, it's erroneous information. And I think the best thing we can do, you know, whenever we're in the mode of teaching, whether that's in the classroom or learning in discourse or whatever, is try to engage people to think about a little bit more critically about what they're consuming and you know, encourage them to do that, you know. If I find students just kind of dogmatically following, you know, down the path, you know, there's not a lot we can do. And I don't think it's my role to be like, this ain't the path, young brother, and do that.
Indeed,
but
indeed.
You got to deal with this and really do the work of putting this in conversation and examining what you're taking in.
Indeed, indeed. And I think it's important to point out, you know, you guys is stated, in which I agree and employ myself, but you know, some of your pedagogical choices, right? It sets that up, right? So it doesn't present that your engagement in that conversation isn't from a perspective or present it as in, well, I got the PhD, these people are clowns. It's through how you already encourage them and prepare them to engage with material in the first place, right? And I think that's very, very important. And I think that's one of the things about Black studies, the emphasis on praxis, right? Like you got to do something with this knowledge, right? But it's not just knowledge gaining for the sake of gaining knowledge, right? Right, it's that emphasis of praxis. I think that too gives Black studies students, you know, a different emphasis of training, of evaluating sources, right? And developing that skill, because they're taught to be suspicious of all sources on the face value, because much of Black studies is a corrective, right? A corrective to bad scholarship, white supremacist scholarship, and et cetera, right? So, you know, I think those things is built in things that can help us address that, because it's a big deal in people's lives. I'll take Dane Calloway, for example. Being in this part of the country, his very flawed methodology and assertions about the history of Black people and Native Americans is very threatening to the political and economic rights, and in many instances, social rights of Native American communities, right? And it's dangerous to relations between African Americans, Black people, in this case though, primarily African Americans and Indigenous Americans, you know. So one of the things I am big on, and I want to know how you guys feel, is that we, people like us, we have to make our information more readily available for the lay people, right? Part of the thing is, if they go on YouTube and type this thing in, they're not going to get many lectures from people like us, but they're going to be overwhelmed with a bunch of lectures with people like whoever, you know. So how do y'all, you know, or do you see ways that we can engage more with the lay people, thinking about intersectionality? So think about all the different types of lay Black people that exist, right? You know, so I'm just curious about some of you guys' thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think so there's a lot of information that gets passed around in Africana studies. There's a lot of good information that's coming out of this field. And I think if we look at kind of the history, the development of the field, it's something that comes out of the community spaces, comes out of these community education spaces. Even if you go back to right after emancipation and establishment of, different types of schoolings and things like that, and move up to the 1960s and freedom schools and this community-based imperative. I think that's something that is still part of the Black studies tradition. I think it becomes there's some challenges in doing that work inside of the academy because of the demands of the academy and what they value. So how much you can kind of pull away from that and kind of be part of those larger conversations requires a bit more effort on our part. But I think that can be done in a couple of different ways. Like, again, Brother McNeill's podcast is doing good work. People are having really good conversations about really good ideas. The conversation that was had last night with Dr. Bradley and Brother Lehman or whatever, like those are ideas that are being disseminated beyond, the pages of the book or whatever, and part of this larger conversation. Dr. Bradley's been on, multiple hip hop shows or whatever, documentaries talking about that work and giving us something to think about Outkast, think about hip hop in different ways. So as we think about publishing and talking to the academic audience, that is but one of our audiences. And if we are interested in being part of larger conversations, then we have to be creative in the ways that we kind of engage in those things, in our personal lives, writing for the public, public facing stuff that's quote unquote to the layman or to the folks that are outside the academy, using some of the same tools, the YouTubes and stuff like that to kind of disseminate stuff, IG Live, all that kind of stuff, man. I think there's a lot of folks doing that work. And it's not necessarily always valued by the academy, but I don't think that's why we do that work. And I don't think that's why we see the kind of importance of being in conversation and being part of these extended communities.
Indeed, I agree.
Yeah.
You are doing it too. And as Khalfani said, not just with the podcast, but the way you use Twitter. I was an old man. I got on Twitter. I learned to better understand Twitter from you, to be honest with you. I was on there clumsily just doing random stuff. I thought it was like Facebook. It's not. And I don't use it like Facebook anymore. I did it for about a month and it was like, no, this isn't it. It's different space. And the way you do it is a great model. So all you grad students out there, and I would even argue junior faculty, check out what he do with it, with metaphors and memes. It's just Twitter.
Yes, sir.
And you'll see how you could do it. But go ahead, brother.
Man, no, to be honest, man, it's wild because looking back, I've had opportunities recently to kind of unpack more of kind of like my understanding of public history and engagement in ways that 2-3 years ago, like when I began New Books in African American Studies, it was to get into a PhD program. Like it was just, I got an email from my advisor, Dr. Jessica Parr, and she was like, hey, I know from our conversations, you want to go to a PhD, so why not interview people who you might want to work with? So the second person that I interviewed was Dr. Shwande Musakim, a Michigan State alum. First student of Dr. Dinah Remy Berry, and so just thinking about who's obviously also at Michigan State. And so, getting to meet people, where my first interview was with at the time was the chair of the history department at Howard, Dr. Nikki Taylor, whose book on Margaret Garner was dope. And so for me, thinking about the different ways that publics are used, right? So it could be given the family history talk at a family reunion, like I did a couple years ago, because there's a way that family can see what you do on Facebook, but it's always cool to bring them inside of what you do by lecturing. And in this case, it was about a family historical figure. Mm-hmm. And so for me, also, there are other avenues to write in too, right? So to do this is also to do it in the time in which you're doing it, because 10 years ago, academic blogs were nothing like they are now. Dr. Dagbovie at the academic job navigating the academic job market last year at AIHS in Austin, Texas, literally said, that in terms of like things that count on the tenure file, or even on as like on your CV, academic blogging on things like Black perspectives counts in a way that it didn't 10 years ago. And so it's even changing in what is privileged as actual and factual like information that can be used. But going back to what Brother Herman said, it's like you have to have different eyes about this, right? There's some things like your academic journal that's gonna be in that academic journal, but you liberate it when someone's like, I want to get it, but I'm a grad student, so I'm gonna email it to them, I'm gonna send them in a PDF. And so you have that. You have things like podcasts now. Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly has now a dope podcast, a last dope intellectual that Dr. Jared Bell at Morgan State helped to put together for her. And so just thinking about the different avenues of public spaces, and there's a way at which, like, amidst the chaos, it's helped bring about communities. I have a community hashtag quarantine happy hour that I get on with some of my Black history friends and family members. They can now, right? We started literally the week after shutdown happened, and we've been on almost the entire year, the last 365 days. And so for me, thinking about talking with the public always comes down to this for me. There's a way that information needs to be pushed out and facilitated and to be discussed, right, and mediated. And I think that I got some skills to help in that conversation, while also saying that there are some things that are not for me, that in terms of opportunities, pass that baton, because somebody passed me the baton and I'm running with that thing like Usain Bolt, you know what I'm saying? And so for me, that's what it's always about: community, about kinship. You do not by birth get to choose your family, but you do get to constantly choose who your family is throughout your life. And that's the way in which kinship has always worked with African people, right? And so for me, that's tapping into that. And so for me, like that's what it's always been about.
Indeed, indeed. And I think it's important that we have different approaches and different ideas of getting this information to the community, right? Because for me, the tech stuff is not the best way for me to do it, but I'm old school. And if people follow me on like Instagram or Facebook, they know, but it's the quarantine. But Dr. Warren be in them schools, elementary schools, K through 12 schools, middle schools, high schools, right? And I'd be in local libraries, right? Small towns usually, because I'm from a small town, Romulus, Michigan, right outside Detroit. So I tell everybody Detroit because nobody in North Carolina know where Romulus is. Although they got to fly to Romulus because that's where the DTW airport is. But Detroit Metro Airport. But that's what I do. And that's why I'm so impressed by the ways that yourself and the ways that Khalfani, Dr. Herman engage. But for the younger people, I'm more impressed. Because a person like me ain't gonna never figure out how to go viral on Twitter unless I frack up. That's the only way I'm gonna go viral. Because I ain't even gonna put the time, I don't even know what to do. It had to happen by accident. I happen to post the right picture with the right quote. Other than that, I'm not that savvy, but I'm not trying to be. I'm not a tech guy, I'm not a social media guy. That's why I use Facebook. It's people I grew up with, my family, and frat brothers. So I can do all my outrageous jokes and all that stuff and nobody cares. On Twitter, I'll be in the dean's office because Twitter's gonna take it differently. And they're gonna cycle it differently, recycle it differently, you know what I'm saying, and all that. So, I commend that work. And, you, as the youngest of us three, you're gonna have to keep your eyes open because you're about to make that transition to either you go into nonprofit or the private sector, or if you go into academia after you complete your dissertation. But you're gonna have to keep your eyes open at the people that's coming after you, because they're gonna need that mentor, and they're gonna need that mentor that isn't far removed from the graduate student experience. I talk to my mentors a lot about that. Because although I'm an older man, I'm, 4 years out of completing my PhD. but a lot of my mentors completed their PhDs in the 90s. Some, like Dr. Hamilton, the 70s. But nonetheless, you know, so it's certain things, because everything's happening so fast, the better position a graduate student, an undergraduate student that wants to be a graduate student, and a junior faculty member, you know, that you have those, you know, skills, you know. And I look at Sharice in the same way. Just, she's so in tune to, you know, what's going on with the younger people in regards to navigating and using these various different platforms. And, you know, that's amazing and wonderful indeed. Is there anything you guys want to bring up that we haven't discussed thus far?
Nah, well, for me, it's just trying to just think about, you know, and also for those who are out there, you know, Q&A box, you know what I'm saying? We want to hear your questions
Yeah,
too.
tell them to put
Yeah,
it
yeah.
in the chat.
Make sure, because yeah, we got the Q&A box and we got the chat box too. So whatever's your pleasure there. And so for me, it's just, you know, just thinking about you know, just thinking about even for Brother Herman, asking you, man, what, you know, why do you do what you do? I'm gonna put you in the podcast, you know what I'm saying, right now. I'm gonna put you in the blender right quick, man. Let's blend this up right fast. Look at the smoothie. You know, what provides you spiritual nourishment, man, in terms of books or things that you go back to that you always got to cite? No, you know, what are the things in the classroom that you have to cite, maybe that goes across the different classes that you teach?
Myself or Khalfani?
Yeah, both of y'all.
Okay. I'll let Khalfani go first.
I'm trying to think about the things that carry me across. So when I'm teaching, right now I'm teaching a contemporary sociological theory class, and I had a conversation with a friend, a colleague in another discipline or whatnot, and we have a similar disposition about. I'm in sociology, but I'm trained as rooted in Black studies. So the question becomes, do I recreate the canon, or do I, you know, introduce some other contemporary perspectives that contribute to the ways that we think about sociology? And for me, I took the latter route because I think it's important. Like, the students in these courses aren't going to hear some of the perspectives that you might hear in Black studies because they're not going through that space. So bringing in Black feminist thought. Yesterday we had an amazing class on Audre Lorde's work or whatever, and that's a perspective that I don't know how commonly that's presented in sociology. So again, you know, we talk about the methodologies and the frameworks and stuff that we're thinking about. The Black feminist part is always part of the ways that, you know, it's always in my classes somewhere. It's always in that work, because I think it's one of the few frameworks that get us closest to thinking about liberation. Those ideas and stuff come out of community spaces. They're not born out of academic spaces. They're born out of community spaces in the ways that Black women see the world, and what do we need to do to create a better space. So I think that's always in there for me as an instructor. If you leave my class, I want you to have this with you, because I want you thinking about how you as a young person, you know, how we as, you know, people in this world contribute to and try to make a better place. That's the work that we're supposed to be doing. And I think that's the reason why in any job that I'm going to do, it's going to be with that thrust in the world. How do we make this space more just, more equitable, more better for Black folks and other folks to kind of be here? But as a teacher, I'm like trying to man, I want this on record or not. I'm trying to recruit students. I'm trying to recruit young people to do that work too. If you didn't know that you was part of this, like you are, I want you to know that when you walk out the door, this is a charge that I'm laying at your feet. You know, what are you doing walking out the world to make this a little bit better than, you know, you found it.
Indeed, I agree with you 120%. In fact, I'm trying to use this webinar as a way to recruit some kids to do this work. So I completely understand. I would say for me, you know, I get in different moods on what soothes me, but I would definitely say a go-to for me is definitely Du Bois. but my go-to with Du Bois is Black Reconstruction. Perhaps
Ooh.
the period of African American history that I teach, basically Civil War to the present. I don't like the era that you study, Adam. I don't like that stuff at all, to be honest with you. You know, but it's ironic because I think it's too complex when you factor in all the different European powers who fights over colonial territories and all that. You know, I'm like, oh man, I got to learn about what's going on in all these various European places to make better sense of what they're doing in America. However, but I do pre-colonial African history, slaveries, and the slave trades. And that is complex as hell. So I don't know. But so I would say Black Reconstruction is one of my go-tos. I would say probably since it came out, I sometimes need my Gerald Horn fix, particularly.
Which one?
Yeah, well, my one is William Patterson, and then
Okay.
my Harlem. But my one is the William Patterson book.
Okay.
I would say that, and I'm not saying this just because he's my dissertation chair, but that what is Black history? That that because it just you know, it reminds me of that part of my profession. You know, I'm a historian and a Black studies scholar. So like you, Khalfani, when I teach history classes, you know, my Black studies stuff I love, you know, I don't really throw that in on them because they wouldn't be able to. It's the same thing you said. They haven't engaged in that discourse. It's unfair. It's making it more difficult for them to learn by me throwing them that curveball. So I say that to say is that joke, shake and joke. Some people call it diop, that mental reality. That's literally for my soul. Ain't got nothing to do with the work. It's just me saying, yeah, let me recharge myself and remind myself who I am in this cosmos. You know, to be honest with you, that mental reality, African civilization, African origins of civilization, mental reality. You know.
And man, look, that's beautiful, man, because to me, going back to my, you know, my usual space of the American Revolutionary era, I got to go to a Black an HBCU scholar, and that's Benjamin Quarles, who's the Negro in the American Revolution, turned 60 years old this year, published in 1961. And so you know, just thinking about, you know, when Quarles is saying, like, in 1961 that the Negroes, you know, was not, you know, and this is a loose quote, that the Negroes' allegiance was not to, you know, a side, but it was to a principle, and that principle was freedom. And whoever gave it to them was that who which they were go to. And so for me, I'm in that tradition of, you know, Lerone Bennett. You're talking about a public historian, a public scholar. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm looking forward to reading James West's book, intellectual biography of sorts on him. But then also just thinking for me, gotta go Michigan State again. That's Shawande Musking's Slavery at Sea, because she's saying deliberately that anything that you are seeing on a plantation or in maritime slavery on a mainland, you're gonna see a feature of that on the slave ship, right? In terms of like how she calls it, the human manufacturing process, right? And so for me, like that's such a informative way to structure these kind of what some may see as loose ends and put it together for people and for students to understand the nature of it. And this is, man, look, Dr. Muski, she's also a friend. Like that's the whole me, like for real, also from Georgia. And so she also has a companion soundtrack that you can find on SoundCloud, not on SoundCloud, but Bandcamp, where she's actually, her and her band Amalgamy are actually drumming, right, for the different chapters. And so for me, I'm just thinking about the different ways that I can teach a class, but to begin, like if we're in the Zoom space, to start to bring in class with that. And then having Sun God Sam from Lupe Fiasco to lead us out of the class on his album Drogas Wave, right? Which is about, you know, his discussion about the Atlantic slave trade. And so to me, there are so many damn ways that Black people, we so creative, man. I love us, man. Like you know, obviously we talk about a lot of like troubling stuff and all that. But let me tell you, man, no matter if they're enslaved, no matter if they're free, no matter century, black people bring so much glory. We ain't even talking about that 80s movie, man. It's just so glorious, man. And I just love being in community with y'all brothers, man.
Indeed. Hey, we glad to have you. We glad to be in the community with you and the brothers and sisters out there. And I tell you, man, the sisters are making power moves right now. So brothers, we just need to stand aside and let them do their thing. Don't
Hey,
get
and support, man. And if anything, support, because
Oh, indeed.
you know they
Not
are.
the way is the best
Look,
way is support.
Well, speaking of that, going back to Michigan State, hot damn, I go to Rutgers. I'm talking about y'all too much. Dr. LaShawn Harris.
Indeed.
I was at OAH in 2019, and at the African American Museum in Philadelphia, a friend of mine, Kevin Quinn, who's a grad student at Cornell, he had just published an article in the most recent Journal of African American History, and she and I were talking about how, you know what I'm saying, oh, I didn't know JAH was open to grad students like that. And so she was like, nah, you know, the opportunities. So I used that as a springboard to ask her, hey, are there any book reviews that y'all need, or are there any books that y'all want to get reviewed? So the first time my name was in print for something was via Dr. LaShawn Harris.
My first publications, book reviews, my boss when I was a GA at Eastern Michigan, he was the department head, he still is now, of Black Studies. He made me read his books. I took an independent study class with him. And that's when I had to read two of Diop's books. But anyway, he made me write book reviews, and then he made me submit it to the Journal of Black Studies. And Dr. Asante published them. And then when I got to Michigan State, Dr. Harris, LaShawn, she's my friend. You know, Dag Bovey and LaShawn and me and my ex-wife, we used to double date all the time. That's my people's. But you know, she helped me once again get some book reviews published. Journal of Radicalism and a couple others. That's what I mean. That's what you got to do for these other rugrats coming in right behind you, brother.
Absolutely, man. And so I got one last question. You know me, I'm Mr. Interview.
Yeah, you done flipped it on us.
Man, look. So we talk about mentors a lot. Are there any mentors, interlocutors, intellectual communities, spaces, publications that you haven't shouted out yet that you want to put on wax and say, thank you, insert whoever you are, for helping me get here? Or do y'all have any that you haven't shouted out yet?
Oh, it's always that. I shout them out all the time, but I'll let Khalfani go first.
Yeah, I text Dr. Umoja over the summer. I was writing something about kind of my journey or whatever, like how I got to where I am or whatever. And I was like, this doesn't, I don't get here without him, without that little push of him remembering that, yo, here's this kid, you know, who was trying to figure out what research was and how to do it. And he pushed me into the McNeil program, which like started the journey or whatever, or kind of made this stuff a lot more visible. So he's definitely part of that tradition in the family at Georgia State. My people at University of Louisville, Dr. Theresa Perry, who's now the Associate Dean of at Dalhousie in Canada and Halifax and whatnot. She's been a constant supporter throughout this thing, and she helped me get to Trinidad and see that kind of the world as part of the and open up to the kind of the diaspora to me in ways that it hadn't been up until that point. Definitely Dr. Carl Taylor, you know, who was my PhD advisor at Michigan State. He's retired now. He was the one who got me to go back to Georgia as a PhD student, because I'm looking around at Detroit, like, you know, I'm noticing some things, the kids that we were mentoring were from Detroit. I'm like, where did they go? What's going on in their neighborhoods, the stories that they would tell me? And he said, Khalfani, what's going on down south? What's happening in Atlanta? And I had not thought about that in a real way, because I was away from that space. But when he asked that question, I was like, well, damn, you know, that's a really good question. And it made me go back down south. And I started to see the world. I saw Atlanta in a different light because of my time with him, thinking about Detroit and stuff like that. Dr. Clarence Talley, who's late Clarence Talley, who really started to shape my analysis on race as kind of this systemic thing when I was at Louisville. And like, there are people all the way throughout that get the job done and have kind of made it possible. And Dak Bovey, you know, even when I was a graduate student, even though I wasn't his student, I was his student. He looked out in some ways and nurtured and supported in ways that, you know, got us over the finish line. So, I mean, we can keep going, but that's the short list.
And then I would say for me, besides who I've already named, the first person who I have to say is Dr. Rita Kiki Idosi. She is now in Boston. She was the director of Black Studies, a AAAS program. When I got there, she recruited me there. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have been able to stick around to get cool and have Dr. Dak Bovey mentor me and become my chair, to be honest with you. You know, the support and the faith that she had in me and allow me to develop intellectually independently, I can't even emphasize enough. And there are so many people that came through AAAS during that time that owe a lot to Dr. Idosi. She is superwoman, for sure. And then I have to say Walter Hawthorne. He was a huge mentor to me and a friend as well. So definitely, and Wando Achebe. And then I would have to say my peoples at Eastern Michigan, Robert Perry, Melvin Peoples, Peters, Dr. Melvin Peters, Victor Okafor, Miss Riley, Janice Riley. She taught me a couple classes at undergrad. She's been teaching in Detroit Public Schools for about over 20 years now. But without them people, in regards to the profession, I wouldn't be here. Just like Khalfani, I can go on and on, so I ain't gonna say my mama, my daddy, of course. But I do have to say this. I do have to say my fraternity, not because I'm trying to big up my fraternity like a narcissist, but I really needed them when I was in East Lansing. You know what I'm saying? And Khalfani can tell you, we had a community, you know what I'm saying? I just happened to have a larger contingent of frat brothers than he had. So he was really, really close and still is with a couple of my frat brothers. Just them, they was our unique group of men. And they gave us people who weren't from that community, us Black men, a support network as men that I could never adequately describe. You know what I'm saying? And that's on the love.
Amen, man. Yeah. So for me, I gotta shout out, man. I can't shout her out enough. Dr. Erica Armstrong Dunbar, man. She's not only the chair of my committee, man, but she's been there for me the last, like, I emailed her. She was still at Delaware, March of 2017, man. And she replied back to my email like 15 minutes later. She was even on a book tour for Never Caught. And I was like, oh, word? Like, you hit a brother back that quick? You know what I'm saying? And I also realized, just by being academia long enough, people don't reply back to you that quick normally. So I also didn't get used to it, but also took that as a moment of like, okay, this might be dope. And I got to shout out Dr. Gabrielle Foreman at Penn State. She recruited me to the University of Delaware, man. When we talk about institution builders, man, she is one of the best ever. Like, she helped to bring the digital Center for Digital Black Research and so much Color Conventions Project. Man, later's got that big old Mellon grant, and it's gonna be getting grad students paid. Anybody who can get grad students paid. And got to shout out, I've never met him, but Dr. Clarence Lang, who is just an institution builder too, who helped out with that too, man. And got to give a shout out to Dr. Theresa Perry, who's actually Dr. Imani Perry's mother. So she trained me at Simmons and has been an advocate for me. She's just like not only an important just like figure, but a friend. And I think too, one of the greatest things about many of my mentors is that it's not only a mentor, like we become like friends and confidants and like close, because they're like, I'm not just somebody who's going to write your recommendation. That's not what the tradition is. It's that I am going to also get you that recommendation, but I'm also going to help you better think and understand the world, and be patient with you when you F up inevitably, right? And so they're there to, you know, tell you when you're wrong, but they're also there to pick you on up too. And lastly, I got to give a shout out to Nigel Fields. He's now, I believe, the superintendent of the national parks out in the Virgin Islands. But before that, he was actually one of the heads of education at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And he was a person who got me to Western Carolina and to be able to work at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to do what we now call the African American Experience Project. It's had different names, but you know, it's one of the names. And so for like most of the last 2 years, I've been in Cullowhee, I've been in Cherokee, you know, and it's provided me a space to learn about kind of history I never really thought about, because I'm East North Carolina, I ain't West, but it's helped me to understand the world in a different way, where slavery looked different, but it was just as violent. And so for me, it's provided me a chance to kind of have a different community. So as I also write about the Revolutionary era, I have another project, because we also know about book projects and on the market. What's your next project? Boom, y'all already know what it is, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, it's just been giving me so much. And so I got to shout them out and put it on wax too, man. And so I also got to shout out to God, man. God is so good, man. Shout out to that brother. Shout out to that brother Jesus, man, because I've just been so blessed by the opportunities and yeah, and blessed by y'all, man. This is great, man. I haven't seen Dr. Walton since a solid in 2019, man, and you know, it was one of the best experiences, man. And so
I haven't seen Khalfani since maybe 2016, because he went to Atlanta, and I was, you know, and although I go to Atlanta a lot, we didn't hook up because I was just there visiting my daughter. So I think last time I seen him, I might have been at his apartment. I might have spilled some wine on his rug.
We was at NCBS in Atlanta.
Oh yeah, you're right. I forgot. Yeah,
you taking it back.
Yeah, I took him too far back. I'm old, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think one of the things that these kind of opportunities bring together is the opportunity to kind of like build broader communities or whatever, right? And I think part of the ways we think about mentorship is definitely like genealogically, like, you know, who mentored you or whatever. But I think these are opportunities for us to mentor one another, that kind of the peer mentorship or whatever, like seeing opportunities that, you know, might benefit Adam, or seeing things that might benefit, you know, be useful to Dr. Walton and his students and stuff like that, and passing those things around and modeling that for the next generation that comes behind us. Like, it's not just them looking up to us, but looking out to the folks who are moving along with you, because that's going to be the folks that you kind of grow with, no matter what spaces you end up in. So.
Facts. Well, thank you all for taking the time to have this conversation with us, with the Catamount community, with the students, faculty, staff, the Cullowhee community, and other stakeholders. On behalf of them, I want to say thank you, gentlemen, and we greatly appreciate it. And on behalf of you all, I want to say thank you to all our participants who have been able to come and go. I see Adam said he wanted to say something before we end.
I gotta also shout out to the library staff at Wilson Library, man, because the library staff, many of my podcasts were done in the downstairs in one of those private, you know, kind of rooms that they got. So I got to give a shout out to the library people, because I had to drive 30 minutes to get there, and so I got to give a shout out to them because
here at Western Carolina.
Yeah, Western Carolina Special
Library,
Collection. Hunter Library. I'm thinking, man, it's late. And so Hunter Library, man, got to give a shout out to them. Special Collections, man. Look, y'all good people. So I had to make sure to get out there too. You know what I'm saying, Hunter.
Indeed, I love the library, as everyone knows. Yes. All right, you guys. Thank you again. Y'all have a wonderful night, and y'all stay safe.
Amen. Good evening, everybody.